ring the cowbell to call in the others, and we'll get started in just a moment. Jeff Robbins, thank you for being with us. Jeff is the CEO of the Utah Sports Commission. I know we have Rusty Vetter sitting there. Rusty, you're welcome to join at any time if you'd like to. And you must be Justin Toth with Ray Quinney and Nebeker as part of the Salt Lake City Winter Olympic Exploratory Committee. But Jeff, you're sitting alone, so we'll let you take away the show.
A lonely feeling.
And we appreciate you coming to give us an update today. And it sounds like we're going to have the opportunity to have a series of updates as the timeline progresses.
Yeah, absolutely. How many were at part of the site visit at the lunch? I know several were. Okay. So that gave you a little bit of an idea of what happened with the site visit, and I took everybody through a little bit of a travel log. And so I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what happened during the site visit. I think that will give you insight into what we just went through. About end of September, we were informed that there might be a chance that the USOC would visit some candidate cities, Salt Lake City, Denver, and Reno Tahoe, and take a quicker look. It was only a day visit. So they said, we're going to come in and we're going to come out. And so they talked about, but we're not sure when. Okay, great. So we waited and waited and waited, and we didn't find out till about 10 days before they came that they were coming. So we put together kind of a team of terrific supporters of the Olympics, public, private, all different kinds of groups, venues, and we said, okay, we need to do something. It's got to be quick, it's got to be crisp. But we started out on Wednesday at the Grand America, and we started out at 8 in the morning. We went through a series of meetings, more business related, with the USOC and the executives. We had the chairman, the incoming chairman, the president, somebody that's over bids and protocol, then somebody that's really more of a government relations person, or the five that came with us. So we took them through a series of business-related items that we went over. We left the Grand America about 8:30, 8:40. We drove past the Maverick Center, talked about the Maverick Center, pointed out that as a host site in 2002, talked about that venue, gave them some insight. We created a briefing book that all of them got. So this is the briefing book. So everything that we did, there were 3 or 4 pages about each stop, bios on all the people in this briefing book that they could follow. We ended up at the Oval at about 10 to 10. Spent about 2 hours, well, I guess maybe an hour there, longer than we were planning. Derek Parra, some of the people were training on the ice. Everyone was really excited. A lot of photo ops showcasing a major venue that's had terrific work done over the years, significant renovation. Got in the vehicles, went up to the Olympic Park, spent about 45 minutes to an hour then, made it down to Rice-Eccles Stadium in 3 hours. So by the time we left the Grand America, made the circle, and this included stops, got up to the park, and made it back down to our lunch at Rice-Eccles Stadium. It was 11:30. Now we had the detail for the governor driving, so they can drive a little more quickly. I'm not saying they did, if they need to. So we got down there and they went. So we did all of that in 3 hours. And we saw venues that have had infrastructure improvements, sustainability types of things have taken place. And then we talked about what happened with the airport. We showcased the airport. We talked about all the transportation that's been taking place in Salt Lake City and other places. Of course, light rail now is like a spider web. It didn't used to be that way during the games. We had a great lunch where we talked about some of the things that were important. We had several guests. We talked about the Rice-Eccles expansion, talked about how much investment's being made in Rice-Eccles. We went from Rice-Eccles, is about a 2-hour block there, and we went over to the convention center. There, the data points were the same thing: investment, expansion, sustainability, solar panels, all playing into what the Olympics are important to the Olympics today in the USOC. Scott Beck took us on a tour. Then we went to Vivint Arena. Gail Miller hosted us there, and we talked about the $125 million renovation. And went through some of the things, and Gail came up and said in the meeting, she said, you know, gathered the USOC executives and said, I want you to know the Miller family has met and talked about this, and we are supportive. We're on board if we get another chance. And that's from the Miller family. This wasn't the executives running the Miller organization. Gail wanted them to know this was important to the Miller family, and they were fully supportive. And then we had a unique experience. We thought it would be fun at the end of the day to let them go and meet the legislature's interim day. So we convened a joint session of the legislature. We had remarks made by the incoming speaker and president, and then Sarah Hirschland, who's the president and CEO. She had a standing ovation from both bodies, everyone, both aisles. And she probably would tell you this. She was a little misty-eyed. It meant something different to her. I sent the video clip of that to her and the executives, and she said that was a remarkable day. She said, I never would have imagined that. Said, you're piling on all this great stuff we've showcased. We got them in vehicles at 4:15 to catch flights that left at 5:10. And that was the day. And all of you should be proud about Salt Lake City, what we showcased. Everybody did a great job. It's a team. This doesn't happen without a team. You're a team. Everyone's part of the team. You can't do things like this without a great team. So the team that day on all fronts succeeded extraordinarily well. So I was the person who's over bids for them and is the lead person. We got him out of the vehicle, we said goodbye, he turned around and he said, A+. A+. He said, well done. And of course, the airport officials were terrific. They made sure that we had boarding passes, tickets, helped them get through TSA. Most of them had TSA pre-boarding, and they made their flights at 5:10. So that's what happened during the site visit. And that gives you a little bit of insight into when somebody comes out from the outside to a community like ours at a very high level and leaves and says, A+, it's all of us. It's the people they met at the lunch. It's you that they talked to at the lunch. It's the people that they met at the venues. So that gives you a little bit of a travel log of what that day entailed. A lot of it was talking about the details of what a next bid would look like. And they're kind of three segments, and you can ask questions if you want to interrupt, feel free, that they're looking at. One is what they call the workbook. And a workbook, you've seen that, I think it's been shared with you, is a series of questions and answers where they want more information, they want detail, letters of support, venue information. It's kind of mirrors the Olympic exploratory report that we created, and then adds a little additional information. So that's the workbook. That's the section they wanted us to fill out that really is mechanical. The second part was the site visit, which they did, and I think, again, A+. Workbook is terrific, and they've said very good things about the workbook. And the last item is polling. Of course, we've had polls done, 89% by Dan Jones that supporting future bid. We've had other indicators from Olympic viewership, winter viewership, where it's extraordinarily high in terms of citizens. 85 or 25% of our citizens in Utah are new since 2002. That's one point I talked about at the luncheon. So you've got 25% who were not here during 2002 who are part of that polling audience. And so you're still having 89 or 90% numbers. So that's the last part that they're looking at, is polling and making sure that the community and those in the community are supportive. So that will end on the 30th. We'll have all the workbook information that will be presented, finished, all of the question and answer going on right now where we're clarifying and they're coming back from additional information will be done by the 30th. That's the drop dead. And then the next 2 or 3 weeks, they'll have a board meeting in mid-December. So our hope is that in mid-December, they'll choose a city. Right now, I think everybody knows, is Denver and Salt Lake. They've not 100% committed to that. Things can change, but there's a likelihood that they'll come out of that meeting in mid-December, I think it's the 13th or 14th, where they'll select one city to represent the U.S. for a future Olympic winter bid. And at that point in time, there would be next steps that we would understand better. Right now, we're just in the selection process, and so a lot of the things that people are really excited about right now, we're not sure exactly what the next steps would be after that. We're getting a lot of real good support, but we're kind of in that phase right now of cleaning up the site visit, answering the questions, and then looking to a decision for them in the upcoming 3 weeks.
Thank you, Jeff. And if I appreciate the timeline of the visit last week. Was it last week? It was on the 14th.
Yeah, 2
November
weeks ago
14th.
tomorrow, right?
2 weeks ago
Yeah.
tomorrow. I was celebrating my anniversary and I missed the luncheon, but I hear it was really enjoyable and I appreciate the full day rendition. So the timeline here involves, at the last step you mentioned, which is the USOC mid-December board meeting, and at that point we have a yes, no, go, no, go, which leads to a further process or not. But at this point, council members, you have a 2 pieces of paper stapled in your packet that's the Future Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games and U.S. Candidate City Expression of Interest Agreement. And that's what's before us today to consider a resolution of support. And it is, I think it's appropriate that we take these steps in resolution format. If there are future steps, which I hope there will be, then we'll continue to take them in a resolution format. But today we have this expression of interest agreement followed by a letter to Mayor Biskupski from the governor and state leadership expressing their intent to enter into an agreement providing indemnification to Salt Lake City as happened with the 2002 Olympics. Those details of the indemnification contract and process are being worked on and are not necessary to be worked out by today for our consideration of the resolution. Correct me where I'm wrong at any point, Jeff.
Correct.
But those details will come to us, and at that point, if the USOC has selected Salt Lake City in their mid-December meeting, we'll have the opportunity to hear from you again.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, today what we would really like to get is there's the expression of interest, the resolution in front of you that allows the mayor to sign that letter. The governor and the legislature have a strong letter of support, and that's really part of protocol. The USOC and the IOC and others, they want to know that they're going someplace where they have significant support. And so, what we're hoping we can get today to meet that November 30th deadline is just the mayor being allowed to go forward via the resolution and sign that document.
I appreciate that. I know some council members want to make a comment. I wanted to note that Vice Chair Wharton and I had the opportunity to meet with you and with Fraser Bullock and others earlier this week or late last week. It all blurs together.
Last Monday or Tuesday,
Monday,
I think,
maybe,
wasn't it?
yeah. And I appreciate your willingness to meet with my peers. I understand that some of those meetings are in the works, and I appreciate that and encourage that collaboration to continue throughout what I hope to be a long process. Councilmember Luke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to propose a straw poll to do that, but if there's more discussion that others want to have before I recommend that straw poll, we can do that.
Supporting the resolution, you mean?
Or just for having the mayor move forward on that.
Any other discussion, or we can get a motion? Is the straw poll necessary?
I don't know. I mean, if we're looking at, you don't need anything for today?
It's on the formal.
Oh, perfect. Then there we go.
And you can make that motion.
I can't because
Actually,
I'm
you're chairing that
chairing,
meeting.
so I
Wow.
can't. But
All right.
I am enthusiastically supportive and hope we're able to have another opportunity to host.
Great.
Councilmember Johnston.
Do we have any sense of the next steps that this council would have to take in the future?
Well, you know, once we know if we're selected, then the next steps will be what games. I get asked when we're going to bid. We don't know for sure right now. 2030 is our best guess, unless certain things change. So once we decide what date we would bid on, then there will be some more steps. But right now, this is just really to be selected by the USOC for the city that would host a future U.S. Winter Games.
My question, I guess, is what are the specific steps that this body, not other bodies, but this body would have to take if it progressed forward?
Yeah, there's an indemnification letter that the governor will sign, which would indemnify Salt Lake City. And there will be some other legal work done that Rusty can talk to a little bit more than I can. But that would be the next steps if we were going to bid on a game. So, but again, we haven't gotten into a lot of detail right now at the USOC on that. But the governor's working on some of those documents right now.
Councilmember Johnston, would you like to hear from Rusty? Rusty Vetter with the city attorney, actually public utilities. Where's your office? City
Upstairs.
attorney?
I'm
Okay, all
upstairs.
right, well.
There's a series of agreements that the city would be signing with
Rusty, will you just pull that mic up?
the USOC and IOC. Jeff mentioned there's an agreement that we signed actually in 1990 related to the 2002 agreements, which was between the state of Utah and the city, essentially indemnifying us and holding us harmless from any issues really with the Olympic bid. And we're having discussions with the governor's office and anticipate that a very similar agreement will be signed with that. And then that gives us the comfort we need in order to go forward with a host city agreement, which is about a 700-page document with the IOC. But it's very similar to what we signed in 2002. But those significant events would be brought back to the council for your review.
The indemnification document, and then the host city agreement, which would be post a June World Olympic Committee.
As I understand it, the host city agreement is actually signed on the day of the announcement. So we will have figured that all out and will have gotten your support for that before the announcement of who would be awarded the games.
Yeah, and the other thing that's nice about this is with a lot of things that we did for 2002, we have templates and we're not recreating the wheel. A lot of it's following the same process we did in 2002. So, and things worked out well then. So we've got the documentation, we know it was signed, we know what the host city agreements were. So much of what you will see is just pretty much the same that you saw in 2002.
Councilmember Kitchen.
Before we put the formal bid in the 90s, who was Salt Lake City up against in the United States?
Well, initially it was, Nagano beat us out. And I was just talking to Justin, he said Norm Bangerter in 1990, was it? Signed that document, but we lost out, as you recall, to Nagano in 98, and then we were selected in 2002. Alaska was looking at putting in a bid. Fortunately, I think I was in high school back then, or maybe junior high, so my memory's not quite that long. But I do know that we lost out to Nagano, and I was actually at Nagano. So the nice thing about a lot of this, and what gives us such a great advantage, is we're coming in and duplicating a lot of what we've already done, and so there aren't a lot of surprises. Cities that are new to this, when you go through a 700-page document, when you go through everything we're going through, it's much, much more difficult. They don't have an existing budget. They don't have the existing work that they can look at and say, okay, how did we do it last time? So we really do have a head start, but hopefully this time we don't lose out to somebody in front of us, right? It's not the same, but.
So it seems like we have everything in the world to be confident about, but in your assessment, what might be a weak spot compared to our competition in Denver? What might set Denver apart from Salt Lake City? Not that I mean,
You're asking me to
I
say we
don't
have a
want to
weak spot?
broadcast our
No.
weaknesses by any means, but I'm just curious, we have all the facilities, we've taken care of them, we could be a sustainable Olympics, there's a lot going for us, but what might go into the calculation for Denver instead of Salt Lake in your assessment?
Well, I think, Denver's a great sports city. I was telling somebody earlier, I think it was Charlie, that, we're kind of focused on what we can control here. And I couldn't worry about what Reno, Tahoe is doing. I can't worry about what Denver's doing. I can control what I can control, and that is we've got a great team here, and we think we have significant advantages. I don't really see deficits, especially when you look at Calgary, all of the other cities you're looking at right now. I don't honestly see a deficit. I see opportunity for sustainability, transportation. You start looking at, I was talking with President Watkins at the U, and their slogan's "Imagine You," right? And I said, well, we're kind of reimagining what we're doing as well. And so I look at the opportunity. I'm not really focused. I'm kind of a salesman in some ways too, but I think there's so much opportunity to do things different and better than we did last time. I would rather focus on those kinds of things, and I can tell you the meetings with the USOC, I think they were very, very impressed. But I don't see a big deficit. Budgets are great, venues are good, so when you start looking at it, there's always going to be minor things, but I don't see a big deficit.
Great, thank you.
One thing that you didn't mention in your whirlwind tour of November 14th was how awesome our airport is.
Oh, it's great.
And that it's going to
Unbelievable.
be even greater by the time those potential bid years come around. And that's an incredible asset in Salt Lake City against Denver. But sorry.
Denver's great. But you can be proud of the way they handled the executives. Fraser and I met them at the gate.
Oh, our airport
And
is the
I'm
best.
telling you, you should be really, really, really proud of the way they handled this, because if you don't think that was noticed, it was.
Proud and not surprised.
Yeah.
So that's good to
So-
hear.
so just
Council
as an
members,
FYI.
do you have any other questions? Okay, this isn't the end of this conversation. Jeff, thank you for taking the time to come speak with us today. We hope to see you again.
Thank
We
you.
hope to celebrate in about 3 weeks' time when the USOC has a board meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and we'll have this on our formal agenda tonight for tentative council action on that resolution. This takes us to, thank you, you may be dismissed.
Thank you.
This takes us to item 2 on our agenda, which is our budget amendment number 2 for fiscal year 18-19. I know we have Ben Ludke from our council office staff with us. Mike Reberg, our Director of Community and Neighborhoods, can come up if he'd like to, and Mary Beth Thompson, our CFO.
We may have put together the names agenda prior to our figured out
Okay,
plan.
well, then
So
Ignore me and do whatever it is you were planning to do.
the names agenda, I think, reflects the previous thinking last week. So
Okay.
our plan was just to walk through the budget amendment, and I think there's probably
Great.
a number of people from the
Who
administration
can
that
answer questions.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Well, then Jennifer Bruno and Allison Rowland and Mary Beth Thompson and Ben, take it away. Ben, do you want to get us started?
Yes, this is the second briefing on budget amendment number 2 of fiscal year 19, and there's a public hearing scheduled tonight, which is the second public hearing. You'll note on the formal meeting agenda in your packet, there is a motion sheet for partial adoption. This is related to the police impact fees to preserve options. Just want to make you aware.
And
The-
Ben, can I interrupt and say, council members, we've dug into this a little bit over the last couple of weeks. It's a big budget amendment. I don't think we're going to have time to get through all of it today. I'm not anticipating that we do, but ask your hard questions, and there's plenty in here for us to chew on.
And we have a follow-up discussion tentatively set for next week as well.
Thank
So-
you.
The budget amendment proposes to use $420,000 from fund balance. This would bring it down to $1.2 million above the 10% minimum threshold. And I also want to point out that there's a little over $531,000 in street impact fees that are proposed to be used, and this will push out the next refund date on street impact fees to April next year. The first item, A1, is the Kronos scope change. It's a request for $67,500. The council originally funded this project to expand Kronos to be used citywide back in budget amendment number 5 of fiscal year 2017. That was an appropriation of $377,000. If this request for an additional $67,500 is approved, it's an 18% increase in the budget. And the reason it's being requested is there are new modules being added. One of them is Kronos Leave Management, which improves the tracking for employee leave based on type. And there's another new module called Kronos Activities, which enables project-specific time tracking, so you can attach employee time to the project they are working on. There's also additional increases since the number of people who would be using it in the city has increased. The staffing has gone up, and the license is proportionate to the staffing who are using Kronos. And the annual maintenance has also gone up since the original appropriation. There's a policy question if the council would like to hear more about how this expanded scope would increase the operational efficiencies and abilities of the administration.
Council members, yeah, you want to hear it, James? Then who shall we invite? Patrick or
I'll
David?
start it.
Mary Beth, thank you.
So I don't
Will you
know
just pull that mic up, Mary
Got
Beth?
it.
Thank you.
so back last March or April, the finance department took over the implementation from HR for the Kronos. Activities module is something that is a must. It creates a job ledger, which is the project activity codes. That's what we've been talking about to monitor certain projects, i.e. sales tax. If we had it, we could have monitored Operation Rio Grande. We could monitor certain specific projects associated with it, and it's related directly to employees' time. If you don't have the activities module, then we will not be able to do that from the Kronos system into the payroll system, and so it won't go to the job ledger. It would only go to the general ledger side of the activities. So that's where the activities is. Activities was always planned on being implemented with Kronos, because without activities, then it's useless as far as a job ledger is concerned, useless for the intent that council wanted, as well as the intent the administration wanted going forward with the implementation of Kronos.
I had a question around the exit of the IMS director in early October and the attrition savings from the vacancy of that position. Is there any savings in there that we can capture to apply toward this IMS request?
We can look at that. I think that there probably is attrition savings there. Either way, the attrition savings is going to fall to fund balance in IMS, or this amount's going to come from fund balance. The $67,000 is actually coming from IFAS fund balance, which is a little bit different, right? It's the enterprise fund balance. We have two different funds inside the IMS fund class. One is
Let me pause you. So
Okay.
Are you saying that when we look at our fund balance, the proposed fund balance remainder after the administration's, if we executed the administration's proposal on this budget amendment, that this money isn't a part of that fund balance consideration?
You're correct. This is IMS's fund balance from the One Solution Fund.
I would still like you to look into the attrition savings
Okay.
application.
Okay?
Thank you.
Mhm.
Council members, do you have any questions on this item 1? Okay, then we'll move on.
Next up is item A2. This was a request for an additional prosecutor by converting an existing office manager. The administration has withdrawn this request for further evaluation based on the relocation into the new district attorney's office. The request may come back in the mayor's recommended budget for next fiscal year.
Okay, A3, Memory Grove.
This is a request for $75,000 from fund balance. An irrigation main broke on the hillside in Memory Grove. The hole is in the middle of the slope, and so it requires specialized equipment to fill.
Poor Parks. Anything, council members? A4 was withdrawn, so A5, Community Connection Center.
This is a request for $32,000 from fund balance for janitorial and utilities at the Community Connection Center. The Facilities Division has been providing these services and then billing the police department for them. This $32,000 was inadvertently not included in the consolidated homeless funding in the CAN department operating budget in the annual budget. So it should have been included, but it was not this time around.
I appreciate the policy question you raised in there, and I wonder if Mary Beth or someone can respond to that, which is if the administration has considered vacancy savings to cover that.
And there are 3 current vacancies at the CCC.
So we haven't considered that, but we can go back and see what that is. Then we would still need to move that money, because those vacancies in the
Sure.
CCC are in the police department.
Yeah.
We would need to move that from the police department into public services for that operations.
That's fantastic.
Okay.
Great. I think the theme that I'm trying to get at, and I hope this guy's trying to get at, is that we don't chip into the fund balance as much as is proposed. So whatever shifts in the budgets need to happen in order for us to minimize that, I'm going to go for it. Councilmember Johnston.
Amen. No, I agree. I have a question probably for the administration about the CCC. This is an ongoing allocation as long as the CCC is operational? Is there discussion about the lifespan of the CCC with the change in the homeless models and that district?
That would be a question for Lisa Schaefer. So can we ask Director
We can
Schaefer to come up?
to it. Yeah, she's.
Or if she's willing to talk to it now.
It's the
Come on up to-
CCC. Question about the CCC and its long-term plans.
Regarding the opening of HRCs. We're doing a lot of abbreviations. What am I trying to say?
Right.
Acronyms, thank you.
Acronyms.
So the
Yeah, the
Community Connection Center versus
Of
the
the police
opening of the
department.
homeless resource centers.
Yeah, forgive me, but I don't think I'm the appropriate person to ask that question. I think the police department or the mayor's office might be the
David's
best.
coming up.
Sorry, Lisa.
David Litvak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember, we have not had those conversations yet. As you know, with Operation Rio Grande, there was a shift in how the Community Connection Center operated, moving away from just being a location where individuals come to services and more as a kind of a location to spread out throughout the city and staff with the co-responder model. And so with the 2 new resource centers coming online in June, unsure yet how that's going to change the model right now or the location needs of the Community Connection Center, but it is something that we are thinking about and will be having conversation about. But right now, there's no plan to change that.
Is there discussion about co-locating them in the police buildings, existing ones? If they're just going to be across the city with?
No, that was not a part of the design or the spacing within the resource centers.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Litvak.
You're very welcome.
If there's nothing else on that item, we'll go to A6.
A6 is recognition of a $45,000 donation that's expected from the Utah Youth Soccer Association. This is in relation to a project the council funded in fiscal year 18 and again in fiscal year 19 CIP. It's lighting of 2 fields at the regional athletic complex, and each field has 4 structures for the lighting.
What will this do for capacity of the regional athletic complex?
It will increase the capacity as the fields are not currently available for nighttime play. It's also expected that this would allow a slight increase in the revenue since there would be additional play, especially if it's related to tournaments.
Perfect.
Anything else, council members? Okay, let's go on to A8. A7 was withdrawn.
A8 is a request for a adjustment to the staffing document for HAND to create a new FTE. This would be ongoing. The title is the Community Development Grant Administrator. The position would be fully funded through CDBG funds, which are received from HUD each year. The fully loaded cost is estimated at $97,373. Each year, the last several years that I've been here, the council has approved 20% of the CDBG grant to go toward administration and program costs, which is the maximum amount allowed by HUD's rules. So this position would be fully funded out of that 20% of CDBG each year. There are 2 policy questions. The first is if we're hitting a theme here, vacancy savings could be used to cover the cost for the second half of this fiscal year. There are currently 3 vacancies in HAND, including a deputy director level. The other policy question is if the council would like to hear more about why using CDBG funds are preferable to splitting funding for this position between CDBG and general fund. HUD federal regulations allow the position to be CDBG funds to be used on a pro rata basis, so however much the employee directly works on CDBG, they could charge it to the CDBG dollars, or the position could be wholly funded out of CDBG.
Mary Beth, will you respond to the vacancy savings question first?
So we will look into the vacancy savings and see how much savings, if it could fully fund this position for half a year. And actually, it'll probably be less than half a year, so we will go back and assess the position and see if we can get the vacancy savings for that position.
I think the council would still need to take action to create the FTE, though. So if the council is not interested in creating the FTE, we would need to know that and not adjust the staffing document. So.
Would the creation of that FTE affect the funding? Let me rephrase that. The deputy director position that is currently vacant, that the council had put intention behind to create a master plan implementation position, which I know the deputy director position, or I believe that deputy director position partially encompassed.
Yes.
Would this funding take away from any of those vacant positions?
I think we would need the details on the current vacancies to see if the other two would be sufficient for the partial year funding, or if we would need to pull some of the funding from the deputy director position.
Melissa Jensen, you want to come up and address that? Director of Housing and Neighborhoods.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This funding was a result, so we're kind of rebalancing of the sales tax. So where before we had our federally funded employees that were working on federal grants all the time, were paid for that. In order to increase capacity, we wanted to blend their funding with general fund dollars that was allocated through sales tax, and then add the position of federally funding dollars. It would not change, to get to your pointed question, it would not change the roles and responsibilities related to master plan implementation or any other role that is currently vacant. What it would do is allow us to, for the regulatory aspects that have been deferred in order to absorb the sales tax responsibilities, to backfill that focus.
Okay. So I want to get a straw poll on council support or non-support of creating this FTE position, and we can hear back from Mary Beth at our next meeting about the potential to use vacancy savings for at least a portion of that.
Yep.
So can I get a thumbs up from council members who support the creation of this full-time position in hand? Nabra? No support for the creation of the position. I've got. Okay, we're getting somewhere. I'm going to be a fourth. Sounds like we should talk more. So I've got 4 straw poll in support. Not sure that's gonna go through when we get to actual approval of the budget, but sounds like.
And we can come back with more information. Maybe we can include some of the information about the role of that employee.
Sounds like that would be helpful. Okay. Great. Anything else on that position, council members? Then we'll go to item A10. A9 was withdrawn.
A10 is a request to use just over $531,000 of street impact fees. This is an add-on to the 900 South reconstruction project. It would be for adding a roundabout. The Transportation Division did a pop-up process earlier this year of several different configurations, and it was determined that the roundabout was the most preferred by the community, but also improved several of the traffic metrics, such as how long vehicles were waiting at the intersection.
Questions, council members? This is a hunk of the 9 line. Don't ask me. Questions? Okay. A11.
A11 is a building space needs assessment. It's a request for $100,000 from fund balance. If approved, the administration would issue an RFP for a space planning consultant. They would look at all city facilities that are covered by the general fund departments and internal service funds. This would not include the enterprise funds like golf and airport. The consultant would have deliverables of preliminary designs, cost estimates, as well as a building vulnerability assessment, and these would be used for long-term planning of city facilities. This is the first that we're aware of that the city would do a global assessment of city facilities, and the police department would participate in the building security part of the assessment.
Questions, council members? Well, I will say that this item informs future items on this budget amendment for me. I think it's a good idea.
So that takes us to A.
Did you have something, Councilmember Johnston, on that?
I think it's a great idea. I'm just still concerned about a 10-point 401% fund balance that drops every year in a good economic time.
Well, you could make a
So
pitch to delay this.
I love Chairman and Hall's statement about are there any other alternative ways to fund through vacancies and other options personally, because we need to have a serious discussion about our fund balance coming up. So,
Councilmember Fowler.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't going to say anything because I agree with Madam Chair that this informs a couple of other things, mostly A13 for me.
Me too.
And I know that we are running out of space for a lot of our departments and that we haven't looked at really where and who should be going where, right? Like which department should be where and what buildings we have available for different departments. So for me, I understand the issue of fund balance, but we also have an issue where people aren't being, are getting to a point where they're crammed enough that we need to do something about it. And I would rather do something where we include a study so we know where people should actually be going than just guess. And this takes out the guessing part for me, but then it does, so that's all.
So I hear that you're supportive of the study and you're not necessarily looking to delay it based on fund balance. Okay.
Correct.
Anything else on this one?
A12, the council might recognize from CIP this year. It's the Washington Square Master Plan. The council did fund this in CIP at the $75,000 level and expanded the scope to include 200 East and Library Square to look at the creation of a new downtown park. So this item has been funded and it's included in here because this transmittal was sent before CIP was adopted.
Probably
we can
withdraw it.
Probably, definitely withdraw that. Okay.
Okay. A13 is a request to use $50,000 from fund balance for carpet and paint at the 5th floor of Plaza 349. This spring, the prosecutor's office relocated out of the 5th floor to the district attorney's office new building. At the time, council staff asked what the cost would be for a basic remodel. It was $136,000 for new carpet and paint. The reason this request is only $50,000 is because in the fiscal year 19 annual budget, the board approved $200,000 for the RDA for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So if approved, this $50,000 plus the $200,000 in the RDA would be $250,000 for the 5th floor remodel for the RDA and economic development to move into. There are several policy questions on this item. Just to go over them quickly.
Actually, let's ask council members if they want to
Okay.
bring it up. Councilmember Fowler, did you have a?
I mean, am I on? Can't see. This goes back to what I was saying with A11, that I think the building space needs assessment needs to happen, in my opinion, before we move a department out of this particular building. I think in part in looking at who we communicate, what makes the most sense. And so I don't think that spending $50,000 on paint and carpet when potentially there may be a complete remodel somewhere else and a reallocation of money somewhere else so that a different department can go over there. I think that, so my support, I would not support this $50,000 for carpet and paint, but support the $100,000 so that we can actually figure out where a department should go and which department should go there.
Councilmember Wharton?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly my concern, is that it doesn't seem like we have an overall strategy, and I would hate to spend money to move a department and then move it back. So I just don't see that this is a huge priority. So.
I want to say that I'm philosophically opposed to the RDA leaving this building, period. And when I voted yes to allocate $200,000 in the RDA budget to help them fit better in the space that they have, that's what it was about, not about socking away money to get out of this building. So philosophically, I'm not going to support the RDA leaving. You can move HR out of this building to the 349. There's other departments and divisions that don't have to work in such an integrated way with housing and neighborhoods and the city council office and the mayor's administration, but I'm never going to support the RDA moving out of here. Councilmember Luke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to publicly state that I strongly concur with what you just said. I think the RDA needs to stay in this building. So,
Yeah,
Councilmember Johnston.
I'd just like to hear the
rationale.
I just want to hear the rationale for the proposal for this.
I was asking you.
You need a rationale for the 100,000 or for the 50,000? So we have space needs that are current, and we have a lack of planning that the 100,000 is going for long term. And so the 50,000 is to take the available space, make it workable, and get people moving into it. Yeah, short. I think the 100,000 intent of that is to take a long-term approach for all departments, as has been said by the.
But the
by council
50,000
members.
makes that fifth floor usable regardless of who's there or on a temporary basis?
It makes it usable as it is today. I don't know if you've been over there, but to renovate that floor and to be consistent with other floors that have been renovated in that building is a much, much more significant investment.
And Madam Chair, if I could clarify, I think it's not 50,000 to make that floor usable. I think it's 250,000 because it would be combined with the 200, because the 200,000 from the RDA would still need to be spent to make that usable.
So we need
50 from the city, 200 from the RDA.
need both of those amounts to do that fifth floor change. Is that accurate?
We'll confirm.
How many square feet is that floor?
These are kind of questions that we could get
That's
into.
an interesting question. I mean,
Well,
we're looking at price per square
You want to bring
foot.
Danny up?
Yeah, I just want to confirm if that's true, if the 200,000 RDA and the 50,000 are both needed for that
We're going to get clarification on that.
Danny Walls, our
innovation.
director of the RDA. Is that your title, director?
Operating officer.
Thank you. It didn't seem quite right. Chief Operating Officer.
The question is, how much is needed? Is that,
For the renovation.
we are in the process of doing the cost estimates right now. We have 200,000 set aside in the agency budget, essentially for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. When we put in this request for 50,000, we did not necessarily know what the costs were going to be to utilize that space. This 50,000 is not necessarily needed. At this point, it looks like really all we need to do is paint and carpet in the area. There's a lot of furniture that was left over that we can utilize immediately, so we don't necessarily have as big of a budget demand. We're probably looking at a total cost of between 150 and 180,000, which we could then arguably cover with the existing agency funds. As part of the question of what to do with this 50,000, if we didn't get that, then obviously we could move forward with improving the space on a temporary basis without it.
I want to ask our RDA chair and vice chair, our vice chair, if we could bring this back in the RDA discussion to talk about the board's intention of that $200,000 allocation and if there's a need for us to therefore clarify the use of it for future. Or I could ask for a straw poll to see if there's council member support to have that RDA conversation.
I think a couple of things. It is important that RDA and economic development have the space that they need to work. I go up there often and there is not a lot of space. And so I think that I'm supportive of making sure that they are in a work environment that makes sense to them. So I'm happy to see what we can do about that, but also I recognize the limitations that are there. The important part is that we're doing a full study, for me, is that we're doing a full study so that we don't have this come up with another department where we're just trying to move somebody so that they can actually do their work the way that they need to do their work. So, I mean, I'm happy to entertain that, yes, but.
I think for me, it's that to hear Danny say that you don't need the 50,000 necessarily. You already have the 200,000, and you and your staff see in the budget allocation that you could use it to move. I feel that we expressed some serious sentiment, a few of us did, about not wanting the RDA to leave this building, and that the only tool we have is to talk about what dollars they can use or can't use to equip a different office somewhere else. So maybe in the interim, until the building space needs assessment is completed, could we readdress that allocation? Okay.
And that would just logistically, that would need to be noticed as an RDA budget amendment for the board to reconsider that allocation, because right now those funds have been allocated. So.
Right. Anything else on this item?
To answer Councilmember Rogers' questions, we asked back in the spring what the square footage was of the floor and the cost per square foot. The answer we received is there's approximately 13,000 square feet of usable space on the 5th floor. If it was rented out currently, it would be Class C, very low grade office space. And for the investment of the carpet and paint, it would bring it up to be about $11 or $12 per square foot.
Which, okay. Ben, can you give me a time check?
So it looks like 3 more minutes would use the allowable time we had for this briefing.
Great. Let's go to A14.
A14 is a $25,000 request from Fund Balance as a local match for the Surplus Canal Levee study. This is to look at reconstructing a segment of the levee adjacent to Wing Point Golf Course. It's part of a larger project that's looking at making repairs along the entire length of the 18-mile Surplus Canal. It's being led by Salt Lake County since the canal is a flood control facility of the county. The deficiencies next to Wing Point Golf Course were identified by the Army Corps of Engineers, and the reason it is the responsibility of the city is the deficiencies are alleged to be related to work performed in 1988 by the city. The current estimate to reconstruct that segment is just under $5.2 million. This study, if funded, would identify alternatives that are expected to be significantly less than a full reconstruction of that segment. The study would take 2 to 3 years to complete. And there are 2 policy questions for the council to consider about interim updates during that 2 to 3 year period, as well as any potential funding liabilities.
Any questions, council members? Great. A15.
So A15, I'll turn the time over to Allison. The staff report in packets inadvertently did not include the correct write-up.
Oh, good, because I was going to say, I
We had a
swear what we
repeat
straw
of golf.
polled was A19.
We just really wanted to talk about it again.
Just wanted to have it taken care of.
That's all right. So this, I will just read the text of what should have been in that area, and I apologize that there was an error. So this would be A15, part-time employee for economic development-related events. General fund, $25,000. Department is Economic Development, prepared by Ben Colander. This position is being requested due to a temporary increase in the number of events coming to Salt Lake City in 2018 and 2019. The Economic Development Department will likely request a short-term extension through the end of 2019 during the regular budget cycle. The position is intended to be part-time and not have ongoing funding beyond the follow-on request in the budget cycle. Because of the timing, the council will see the second half of this request in the FY20 recommended budget. Events this position will be working on include Future Forum, Site Selectors Guild, United Nations DPI/NGO. Potential additional events based on recent inquiries include the NBA All-Star Game, the Olympics, and FIFA 2026. The council may wish to ask when site selection decisions are expected for the potential additional items listed.
Does that mean we might have the Olympics this year?
I think that may be a question for the...
I mostly ask in jest, but it was a funny thing to add to the list. Are there council member questions about this part-time position in economic development?
And just to underline, it's a temporary position, so there's no staffing document adjustment.
I think I just want to mention that as we talk about the costs that the city is backstopping and putting forward to support the UN DPI NGO conference, that this comes up as another investment the city is making if we go ahead with this budget amendment request, just for tracking purposes.
So we are at a quarter after. Do you want to proceed?
Are there, let's see.
There are not any urgent items. Those were addressed at the previous meeting.
Okay.
The only thing the council will see is what Ben mentioned at the beginning, which is a motion to approve impact fees so that police impact fees are not refunded. And that's consistent with the council's discussions in October.
And
Right.
it's only covering the police impact fees from October and this month.
And I think that there isn't a lot of discussion on that one because we've submitted questions to the administration that they're, I think, working on getting us some written single voice answers to. We look forward to seeing those. But that's item A18. I believe A16 and 17 we addressed with a straw poll. Did we address both of those with the straw
No,
poll?
we addressed
Only
A17 with the straw poll.
Did you get the buses? Great. Are there any questions about A16? Okay. In A18, we just spoke to. A19 is our last item in this section. Should we just try to get to it?
A19, the council straw polled at the previous meeting.
Great. Look at that. We made it through.
We just wanted to provide the additional information about the golf fund's fund balance. We got that after the last meeting.
Thank you for that. Any questions on A19? And A20 is the UN conference. Questions? Okay.
There
Are you
also
satisfied, Ben?
There are also 2 council-added items to the budget amendment. The first one was previously discussed in announcements. It's adding $13,000 from fund balance for a bilingual dual mode survey to include a telephone component. So this is adding that to the budget amendment as the council directed. The second is an adjustment to the council office staffing document. This is to add 2 FTEs. There's no budget impact this fiscal year because, again, vacancy savings can cover it for the remainder of the year. And there is a comparison table of the current, labeled old, and the new staffing document to show the cleanup of titles that are changing.
Any questions on that item, council members? Wow. Well, we did great getting through this. Thank you. And we will still be back next week to
Yes.
finish it up.
There are a couple housekeeping items that we can address at the next session.
Thank you. And thank you, Mary Beth and Allison and everyone else who was here to help us answer those questions. This takes us to item 3, the council member compensation discussion. I know Jennifer Bruno's on here, but it doesn't look like you're planning on coming up. I think Cindy Gus Jensen is going to help us through, and I believe we have a PowerPoint. Okay, thank you.
Is it okay if I go ahead, Madam Chair?
Yes, please. Thank you, Cindy.
All right. So this is the least favorite topic of any elected officials on the planet, as far as I know. So what we're here to do is provide you with as much information that we can for your consideration. One of the first tools that is used in establishing salaries for employees, at least, is a salary survey. And we have over the years tried a salary survey with elected official positions too, and it was very, very difficult to find appropriate matches. And the reasons are fairly obvious, but let me just say the form of government is a bit unique. There are a lot of council manager forms. There are a lot of other forms that it was difficult to find cities of our size that had this type of form of government. Also, we have a relatively small population compared to the major role that Salt Lake City plays as a capital city and a regional hub. And there's, just to kind of give you a silly illustration, there was one point at which when I was checking these, and this was years ago, but I was checking the cities to which we were comparing and saying, this doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm going to go in and just look up each city and see what their characteristics are. These were our closest matches. One of the cities had an airport that was just a general aviation airport, and they had a crop duster and private planes. And so that's a little different than having an international airport. And then another was a city that had a bookmobile service as opposed to a library system. So that's been a long time ago. It's not recent, but I thought it kind of gives you an interesting illustration about how it is a bit difficult to find places that totally match Salt Lake City. And then another thing that we've been looking at with this is that there have been a lot of changes in council member roles. The city council member salary was set up at first in 1980 and then modified in 1982. It was set up with so that it was 1/4 of the mayor's salary. And the idea, I hate to say it, I was here. I was here for both, and both times they set the salary. But the ratio was 4-to-1, where 25% was what the council salary was of the mayor's, and it was looked at in terms of approximately 10 hours per week of meeting time for the city council. And the meeting time was in the evenings. So 2 nights a week in the evenings is what the council was committed to. And if there were times when the council needed to have special meetings with administrative staff or things like that, the administration would accommodate that with having the staff people stay in the evenings. And so that was really costly, I think, for the morale of the city employees and for the ability for them to, keep going. You can only work 50 or 60 hours a week for so long. And then over time, it's evolved so that the council members really have, the burden has shifted from the overall organization of the city to the individual council members, because we've moved almost entirely to a daytime model with the exception of formal meetings. When council members need to come in for meetings, it's during the day. When you start your meetings at 2 o'clock, the formal or the official meetings, but on a Tuesday, you're here from, some of you, 8 or 9 or 10 through 8 or 9 or 10 at night. So the burden, in a sense, has shifted so that if you have a full-time job that's daytime hours, there's a cost probably to you as opposed to the city government to attend those meetings. So you are not able to attend. I say you, I mean council members are not able to attend their work during those hours. You either need to take time off without pay, or if you have a generous employer, or if you're self-employed, you can have that flexibility perhaps. But so those are some of the kinds of changes that have taken place in the time since the form of government was set up. Talking about balancing this and looking at the values that are considered when setting elected official salaries, there's extremes on a continuum. One extreme is that public service should just be compensated minimally. It's a public service and it should be voluntary to some extent. Now, the opposite view of that is, or a consequence of that perhaps, is that you could inadvertently limit the pool of people who can serve, who are able to serve. And if I look at the councils over time, the first council that I worked for had 2 teachers. One was a college teacher that taught during the day, and one was a high school teacher. And they could manage the council role because they came at night after they had completed their workday. Now I think it would be costly for a teacher to serve because after they've run out of their days of vacation or whatever it is they have, they would need then to go without pay at their job or pay a substitute or that type of a thing. So over time, the type of folks who have access to the office might be changing. There's a danger that you can get into a situation where only people of means can serve. And that's typically not a healthy public policy approach. But it kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that public service is either volunteer or should be compensated very minimally, or say with a stipend, that type of thing. There's a lot of discussion about you want to look for that sweet spot where you're looking for a salary that's fair to the taxpayers and a salary that is fair to the office holders, so that the office holders are not having expenses that far exceed what they're a reasonable amount compared to the salary they're getting. Another interesting value thought is that because it is such a painful topic, there's one school of thought that is, let's just not talk about this. Let's do it very infrequently so it isn't bothersome, upsetting to the taxpayers or upsetting to the elected officials. Another school of thought is that it's better to have a public awareness of the salaries and regular opportunities to comment. And I'll say one of the reasons that we finally completed this work and looked for the best way that we could to present it to you is there will be a vacancy in District 4, and we just wanted to bring it to your attention in case it's at the point now where the position is demanding enough that you could inadvertently be limiting anyone can apply, but who is able to serve given the time demands and the salary constraints. Some examples of that on the next slide. When the form of government was first established, the number of community councils in the city was limited to 8, and it was limited by ordinance. And so the 7 city council members just had 8 community councils to cover among them. So that was really pretty easy and didn't take a lot of time. At this point, there are 27 recognized community groups. City council districts have between 3 and 8 community councils. Any group can form. There's no limitation or anything like that. So there's a natural increase in what it takes to engage with constituents. And then in addition to what I was talking about with the schedule shifting to daytime, to a great extent, there's also a change a bit in the role. Council members are now pretty regularly asked to serve on committees and boards in the community. And these are just the ones that I could think of off the top of my head. But there are several committees relating to housing and homelessness. There's the Wasatch Front Regional Council that the City Council has a seat on. There's the Utah League of Cities and Towns. We currently have a member of the council serving on that, and we have previously had people serve in officer positions with the league, and that's an additional time commitment. The chair is now part of the Chamber of Commerce. That didn't used to be the case. We have the Downtown Alliance now that has, I think, at least 3 committees that the council member from the area, it's hoped that they will attend those. We have had council members serving on the Quality Growth Commission. We have someone on the Inland Port Board, someone on the Air Quality Board. So there's a lot that has evolved over time with the council. So before I get to the options that we just listed for you to consider, I wanted to tell you how we've kind of tried to evaluate this, since salary survey is difficult. We tried to look at, what are the policy issues associated, and what can we quantify? We can quantify that, go back and look at that original ratio to the council members, the mayor and council members' salary, and see, has that changed? And the peculiar thing, it's peculiar not by anyone's fault, but just the situation is that the ratio has changed. So now the council compensation is, I believe, less than 20% of the mayor's salary, as opposed to 25 as what it was. And part of that is just that the council at one point did adjust the mayor's salary. They looked comprehensively at the mayor's salary and council salaries, had public input. It was recommended to increase both the salary for the mayor and the council members, but the council elected to increase the mayor's and not the council. So none of this is a mayor's fault. It's a situation of what the council has decided over time. So one thing you could do is you could look at that ratio and restore it to what it was originally. So not only is your time increasing that is spent as an elected city council member, but your salary as a ratio of the mayor's salary is less. We can quantify the time spent now as being different. We can also quantify the number of public contacts that you have, the boards that the council is asked to serve it on. And as a touchstone, we can look at the county council salary. So that it's not identical, but there are greater responsibilities in the county in some cases, but there are unique aspects to the city as well, with the international airport, with the extraterritorial jurisdiction on watershed, with providing water outside of city limits, with the Broadway theater, those kinds of things. So I think there are reasons that you could, at least as a touchstone, look to the county salary. So, options that we came up with is, first of all, you could tell us to take a hike and say thanks, but no thanks. That was lovely analysis, council staff, but we're not planning to adjust the salary. Or you could adjust the salary to be equivalent to the Salt Lake County Council. Or you could adjust the salary to affect the ratio between the council and mayoral salaries as originally established, and just do that one part, but not recognize the increased demands of the council position and the shift to daytime meetings. Or you could adjust the salary to reflect the ratio between the council member and mayoral salaries as originally established, and also recognize the increased demands of the council position and the shift to daytime meetings. And then there's, I'd say, two more. This is kind of a strange thing, and I'm wondering if you might want to reevaluate it, but people who are city department heads, well, city employees, city department heads, mayor, they have the opportunity to get vacation, and the department heads and mayor have the opportunity to receive an auto allowance. The council members, as elected officials, you pay your own expenses for any transportation. You aren't eligible for the auto allowance. And then the vacation pay, obviously you don't get vacation pay, but the irony to me is that if you miss more than 3 council meetings, we charge you So not only do you not get vacation, but we also charge you for missing city council meetings. So that's a policy that's internal, that the council has established, and you could change that if you wanted to. And then one other thought is that there are some councils that have a differential that they pay to their leadership positions based on the additional time that is spent with the RDA chair and vice chair and the city council chair and vice chair. So those are all pieces of information for you. The end.
Thanks, Cindy. I think that while we don't typically have Cindy do staff presentations, she is the staff member who's been here for 30 years, actually even a little bit before that for a moment, and has the context of the awkwardness of these political conversations around adjusting one's own pay. And yet it's been several years that the council has talked about, in a very awkward format even then, the difficulty in accessing the democracy that is this piece of government. I consider the city council roles to be, I think, the lowest rung, the first access to political office. And I love it that way. We're elected neighbors, really, and we can wield a lot of work and good work in these positions. And yet, as I've looked forward to my time not being on the council when I'm finished with my term, and talked to several people in my community in District 5 who I think would be fantastic replacements, and encourage them to run for office. I've had several people come back to me and say, I really would like to, but my family can't afford for me to do that with the time that it takes to serve in office. And I know that a value of our council and of this city is diversity. We embody that in so many ways through all of our departments and our investments in our youth, to the arts, to bringing the UN here to have conversations on a global level. And yet, we may inadvertently be limiting the pool of people, limiting the diversity that can access this entry-level position, as I consider city council offices to be. And it is a lot of work. It is a lot of time, and our residents deserve that representation from us. I think all of you know that, and that's why you serve the way that you do. So I appreciate Cindy creating a context for us to consider the compensation. And quite honestly, when we evaluated the city council office budget this year, it to me looked like an opportunity within our existing budget, without taking from fund balance, to rebalance council member compensation back to a 4:1 ratio. And so we bring that to you for consideration tonight, that without having to take from our city's fund balance within our existing city council office budget, we could readjust that. And I would be supportive of us, I'm not sure which option it is, but setting that into ordinance so that future councils can remain at a 4:1 ratio. Of course, a future council could consider any other ratio that they want to. But I think it's important in terms of access to democracy and serving in this office that we make it actually accessible to more of our population than it is today. So we do have a public hearing scheduled for this item on December 11th, which is also the day that we would be able to take action. It's our last meeting in December. Are there questions that council members have for staff that they could come back to us with? Or yes, Councilmember Fowler.
So this is going to be for you, Cindy. The 4:1 ratio, when that discussion happened, it makes sense given the part-time versus full-time, and that was in a staff report that was prepared and distributed to us earlier. You mentioned that this ratio hasn't been followed. In part, do you think that's because of the difficult conversation it is for council members to have this, and so it just has never been really addressed before?
Yes, there was a time when there was actually an increase recommended, And the council said, not right now. Let's wait, let's discuss it in a couple of years. And that couple of years became 8 or 10, I don't know how many. So this is, as far as I can think, this is the next discussion that we've had before you.
The follow-up, since you were here, context to perhaps that discussion on the 4-to-1 ratio. Was it perhaps in your memory and recollection sort of the intent to kind of keep this 4-to-1 ratio for future councils, or can you provide some context about that discussion back in 1980?
I probably can't accurately do that. I just remember that they were thinking in terms of the amount of time that the council would spend, and then trying to think of it as like 10 hours a week or so. What's interesting to me, I was trying to think of all the different ways that you could look at this, and I started looking at what's the number of hours council members spend per week. And one of the values that the council member, the public voted for originally in establishing the form of government was to have a citizen council and to have it be part-time. So when I got to adding up the hours, and sometimes it equaled 40, well, that's not going to be a good calculation. That's not. So when I'm saying that, I don't want to have anyone infer from what I'm saying that the council still spends 10 hours a week, or even that the city council spends only 20 hours a week. There are times of year, like during the budget or during the legislative session, where there are council members spending in excess of 40 hours, but it still is a part-time position, and that's how it was established, and it seems to be a core value. Sorry, I don't know anymore.
No, that was helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you, Cindy.
I want to just, I don't know how this will all go
Well,
down.
I've got a funny
exactly.
comment before you go into something serious.
Well, I was going to praise you, James, actually.
When Andrew Johnston ran, he asked me, how much time do you spend? I'm like, he says, will it take away from your family? I'm like, yeah, but the time you have with your family is so much better because you actually have quality time. Look at him shaking his head. He's like, that is all lies. So I tricked, District 2 should be grateful because I tricked Andrew Johnston into running.
Well, go ahead.
Tell everybody that story, by the way, James, over and over and over again.
I know, and Cindy mentioned a few of the boards and commissions that I think you phrased as community groups. Some of these are Senate-appointed state commissions and boards and such. And I'm not going to go into who serves on everything, but I am, in being chair this year, I have to tell you how grateful I am for the ability you each have and the skill that you bring to the service representing our residents and Salt Lake City on a statewide level, on a county level, and in critical conversations that are absolutely about the benefit of our residents today and in the future. And if you weren't in those conversations, I can't imagine that the capital city wouldn't be included in those conversations, but I can imagine that if you didn't each have the means through your other employment, that you wouldn't be able to go to those meetings. And I know personally how many hours each of you serve. I'm grateful that you have the ability and the willingness to do that. Making an adjustment like this is about making the ability for other people in our community to do this, because I know the willingness is there with many people, and the pay doesn't make it able, in my opinion. So I appreciate all of you and the service you give, and that even if we adjust the salary to a 4:1 ratio, it is undercutting and underpaying for the work that this office does, actually, because it is so much more than 10 hours a week. And if we're doing a 4:1 ratio, that's what we're saying, that it's 10 hours a week, and it's so much more than that. So I'm grateful for the service you do. Even if we make this adjustment, it's still an incredible service. Anything for council staff? We'll hold off on a straw poll. Councilmember Johnston?
I do fault James completely for that discussion. He didn't even flinch either. It's tremendous lying ability. I'll just comment that I support the ratio concept. We can talk through what that means and the exact ratios. I know just from a personal experience to disclose, and this wouldn't be possible without compensation, frankly. I mean, I have an employer who allows me some time to flex my schedule, but every hour I'm here, I have to make up somewhere else in my week at my job. And I think that's important, but the second piece is important is I've realized in my 2-3 years now on the council that my ability to free up time to do council stuff is directly related to a lot of other things. My time, my other job, my day job, my kids. I have 2 kids, my wife. I mean, there's a lot of other things to factor in, and so the quality of representation sometimes reflects the amount of time you have, obviously. I mean, I think we miss that sometimes, that if I'm willing to check my emails on a daily basis to follow up on constituent issues, that's time I have to find someplace. Maybe I don't sleep. Maybe I don't do something else. But if there's time to go to the meetings, if there's time to meet with constituents about things, if there's time to serve on commissions that benefit the city, and I'm thinking of James Rogers on the Northwest Quadrant Commission, or Quality Growth, or anybody else who does something that directly impacts the quality of life in the city, but demands a lot of time. And so we can have less time in this job, but there's also going to be a trade-off. There's going to be a trade-off in what we influence in our neighborhoods and our communities on the state level. There's a trade-off in how many times we can meet with people in our neighborhoods. There's a trade-off in just the time you have available. So I'm sensitive to the nature of this. I get it. I'm also sensitive to what Chair Mendenhall has talked about, that increasingly it's hard to make ends meet, period, with one job. And if your second job doesn't pay, it may be impossible for most folks. I just talk from my neighborhood and my experience. I think we are going to lose people who may otherwise be willing to look at it and try. So thank you for bringing this up. Thank you, Cindy, for the historical reference. I don't know as a teacher how I could do it, period, frankly. So I appreciate that perspective. And I also will appreciate a lot of feedback from the public. And let's talk through this and hear their thoughts. Let's hear what their impressions are, and let's hear what they would think about trade-offs as well. So.
All right, anything else, council members? Thank you, and thanks to staff for putting the time in to give us some context for that decision. We encourage the public to come and talk to us on December 11th, and also to think about running for District 4 position. Okay, we're going to move on to our funding our future interlocal agreement with the Utah Transit Authority. I'm sorry for the time cut short a little bit. We do have a 6 o'clock commitment downstairs, but we have Kira Luke from our office, Ben Ludke from council staff, also Jennifer McGrath, maybe he's in the audience, John Larson, and Julian Sabula from the Transit Division, Transportation.
I'll jump right in with my intro while everyone's getting settled. Just to add a little context from the whole funding our future piece of the conversation. In May of this year, the council approved a 0.5% sales tax increase to address 4 critical unfunded needs, one of which is improved transit service. As part of the annual budget process, the council allocated over $5 million to the goal of improved transit service, $2.8 million of which was identified for year 1 of an agreement with UTA. In the contingent appropriation for this funding, the council identified specific routes and policy guidelines for this agreement. Since that process was set in motion, the administration and UTA have been working to create this agreement to implement the city's services by August of 2019. We've been informed that to meet this deadline, the agreement needs to be adopted no later than January 2019. With the administration, we originally planned a schedule that allowed for 2 briefings to discuss the interlocal agreement and set a public hearing for tonight with hopes of a December 11th adoption. Last week, the administration provided the resolution for adoption and a transmittal outlining anticipated points the ILA, or interlocal agreement, will cover. These were included in your packets, and then the council received a draft of the ILA a few hours ago. The ILA essentially outlines the who and how of the services UTA will provide the city. It identifies responsibilities of each party, recites mutual values, acknowledges the council's specific requests respecting routes and service, and provides a framework for calculating the costs. The what of services, the routes, specific costs, maps, are deferred to addenda to be negotiated, considered, and adopted annually. The first of these addenda has not yet been transmitted. I think this brings us to the present moment, and if I may, I'll defer to Ben real quick to speak briefly on the funding for this initiative.
I thought it might be helpful context for the council to remember the funding from the increased sales tax that was set aside in the annual budget. The table on the screen summarizes each of the line items the council approved from the increased sales tax as part of the annual budget. And you'll notice at the bottom here, this 2.8 million, these two line items are the amounts that will be governed by the interlocal agreement and the addendum. And these are really the mobilization costs to get things rolling, not to actually implement and have the buses out on the streets yet. The funding for the implementation will be included in the next annual budget, and it's estimated to be approximately $5.3 million for the phase 1 implementation. And of course, that's dependent upon, one, the sales tax revenue coming in as we budgeted and as we expected it, and two, it continuing to be a top priority and included in the mayor's recommended budget and the council agreeing. And there are two additional line items I just wanted to quickly point out. The first is the performance measures, service adjustments, corridor studies, and technical analyses. This is not governed by the interlocal, but it is certainly related to it, and some of the information that may come out of it related to performance measures would be helpful to include on the Funding Our Future website to communicate to the public what's happening with this funding, how are we tracking that it's improving services. And the other one is the frequent transit network capital improvements. This is also related because it would be improvements to bus stops, adding shelters, adding concrete pads, making them ADA accessible. So while the bottom two would be governed by the interlocal, two of the other line items are also related to implementing the vision of the transit improvements. And with that, I'll turn it over to the administration who has a presentation.
Great, thank you. And we do have a presentation. We recognize we're short on time, so.
Perhaps we skip the background.
Okay, all right. Just want to jump right in.
Sure. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the background. And I should say, I guess just to start, I've had my head deep in this for 6 months. And so if you want to stop me at any time with questions, if what I'm saying doesn't make sense, please do, because to me it will seem obvious because I've been buried in it, and it may not to the rest of the normal world. So.
Can we start with a question, Julian?
Yes.
Councilmember Fowler.
Thanks. I think just because we are short on time and we have been working, you've been giving us pretty regular updates on where the ILA is going. I think my questions are just in relation to the newest changes, which was the master plan and the addenda.
Sure.
So my understanding is that the master agreement, and I see it in one of your slides, right, but will kind of govern the whole relationship as a whole. Can you tell me what the addenda then, and I see what the points are here, but in a little bit more detail, what the addenda will address that the council will be looking at every year?
Sure. So the basic framework, we approached it with a master agreement that would essentially establish the rules of the game for the next 20 years so that we're playing it the same way every year. We're not negotiating from scratch on an annual basis. And then we have something consistent and transparent for the public that dictates how we negotiate costs and what each year looks like. The addenda gets into the specifics of any given year, and it runs in tandem, or how we envision it is to run in tandem with the budgeting process, so that when the allocation is made, the addendum is a direct relationship to that allocation, and it specifically gets into, here is what we're getting this year. Again, master, how we do things, and then addendum, specific year, what we're doing.
Okay, thank you for that. And I have to say I'm in support of that model.
Okay.
because it makes sense to do it that way, so I appreciate that change. And then my other question was just on timing. I think Ben mentioned that, or Kira, one of you said something, that we need the interlocal done by January 29th. Is that accurate?
Ideally, yes. Ideally, we actually have it completed this year if we can. And we don't want to do that at the expense of getting it right. And so we have a couple different approaches that could push it to January if we need to do that. I should also say that it's contingent upon approval by the UTA board. It's a new board, and so, you know, we eagerly await their thoughts on this agreement and how we've approached it. And, you know, from there, I think that will tell us something as well.
So as a follow-up on that, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Please,
but,
these are questions I have too.
as a follow-up with that, if we were to be able to approve the agreement in December, it would simply be the master agreement, and you'd be coming back for approval with the addenda in January.
Yeah, in fact, we may be able to do it sooner. I mean, honestly, I think slide 17 of my presentation is the contents of this year's addendum. There are a couple of small, and yeah, and we can actually speak to the addenda. It's really just the legalese around it, but the content we don't anticipate changing unless you ask us to change it.
Can I interrupt and say
Sure.
that even though it's legalese and we don't anticipate changes, it is really important that we know what we're getting into an interlocal with.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like deciding to buy a house before you've really walked through it.
Right.
So I think that having that deadline at the end of January and being able to get that clarity, that surety
Yeah.
in between here and there it's critical for me.
Yeah.
And sorry, Madam Chair, was a draft of the interlocal transmitted today, this, right? Okay, so we have access to that now to read. Okay.
Do you
And
have, I'm
sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
let's be clear. Are you saying that the addendum is in the transmittal that we received just after 3 today? That all of the data, all the information, the numbers, is that in the transmittal we just received? Because I saw it as blank.
I was anticipating it just being the master agreement.
The master agreement is there, yeah. But
So-
not the,
The blank addendum is intended to be a part of the master agreement, and it just says each year, this is what the addendum format will be. And the actual addendum will have the information that I mentioned is in slide 17. And I can verbally address the capital costs, which are not shown here. They're very small, but they are relevant in implementing the service. It's like a porta potty, so operators have a place to go to the restroom when they're on breaks. I mean, that's essentially it. So, but in terms of the content, the numbers in slide 17, and if you want, I can advance. Oh, I'm not going to see the numbers the same in the PDF as it's the mobilization activities. So it will, if you look at the bottom line on each of these, this just shows a month by month what that looks like over the course of the next year. So the funding's already been approved. UTA's budget year starts in January, and they would just start drawing down. And you can see it goes up over time and then stabilizes once they're fully staffed up, their people are trained and so on, and ready to start driving buses in August. So that's really what the first addendum will be. The actual service miles would happen as part of our next budgeting process, and we actually have most of that put together already, so we can start that conversation whenever you're ready.
And I'll just make a point here, just how close we are on this. I mean, so we started in July, and it's now, late November, and that we're this close on it. I just want to give a lot of credit to a lot of people sitting behind me. But we're down to one last cell on the cost calculator spreadsheet that we're very close to having finalized probably the next day or two, and then we can move ahead putting together the addendum for this fiscal year.
So it sounds like you could have the final cell filled in by December
Yes.
11th, but could you have the addendum finalized by then?
I think so.
It's possible. I don't want to make commitments on the part of the two attorneys, but
I'm going to say I can't speak for
That's
the
the goal.
council.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? People that personally, I have to have that in order to finalize this on December 11th. I'm not going to buy the house unless I get to walk through it, okay?
Yeah.
Personally, that's how I will vote. So, in hearing that we're set up to take action on December 11th. We've got a public hearing again tonight. Is there anything you need from us today to help get that thing done?
I'm looking at Megan. I feel like
Superpowers.
it's doable. So when you mentioned the January 29th deadline, my question was more about, are you okay if we do it sooner? Because I think we can. And ideally, yes, you're adopting this agreement so that UTA can start the process they need to do to get the service on the ground in August, which would start in January. We can, like I mentioned, push it a little bit, but we don't really think that's the best idea.
Cindy Guest Jensen?
Just, so if you receive it like we did this transmittal today, if you receive it on the 11th, just know that it won't have any, staff analysis. You'll just be looking at
And the
the raw
public,
information.
the public has nothing honestly to comment on tonight.
And they won't, they'll have more because these guys have provided their very good presentation and also a new transmittal today, but they won't have the final stuff in advance to comment on it, so.
So January 29th is our drop dead date. Okay.
Right, and hopefully sooner.
Okay. Well, we appreciate the pace at which you're working and the public awareness of our decision and our ability to have time to review it.
Yeah.
More than 24 hours is pretty important. So we appreciate both of those things. And we look forward to you filling in the last cell and getting that addenda completed. And we'll bring it back as soon as we can.
Okay, and I just want to just say how much I appreciate the council staff have been fantastic. And I know that this has been a crunch for everyone, and we really appreciate the hard work and flexibility shown by council and staff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
John? Okay, council members. Oh, Kira.
Speaking of the timing, I just want to confirm, does the council wish to have a follow-up briefing in 2 weeks on the 11th, the same date as potential action?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'd need it on the 4th, honestly, to be able to have a discussion on it.
All right.
But I don't know if you're able to do that.
We can at least have the master, if not the addendum.
Okay, so let's schedule the 4th for a work session update.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, anything, thank you very much. Anything from the executive director announcements? No? And no report of the chair and vice chair. We don't have a closed session, and we'll see you across the hall at 7 o'clock.